Thank you for taking the time to join the session From the City to the Desert and in Between. This webinar is about identifying and supporting the needs of various lone workers within the organisation. So my name is James Fitzpatrick. I'm a Business Development Manager for Safety IQ. And Safety IQ is an organisation that provides software solutions to a whole range of industries around the world in regards to looking after their remote and lone and mobile workers, as well as any other workers with our safety tools and systems. In today's session, we're really just going to run through a quick agenda of looking at lone workers at a glance. So seeing what type of lone workers we see in the field, what are some trends with lone workers, and what sort of different shapes and sizes they come into and how that affects the requirements and support that they need. We'll take a look at the role of technology that plays a part in supporting the lone workers and how we can engage with those lone workers when we're looking at implementing, say, a technology solution or additional tools or processes to help them while they're out and about in the field. Really what this session is about is giving you a chance to think about your lone workers, who they are, who they might be, and what you're currently doing to support them and where you might want to head with that direction. At the end of the session, if we have time, we'll cover off a bit of Q&A, just a bit of housekeeping if you don't mind keeping on mute throughout the session. If you do have questions, pop them in the chat. If we get time, we'll answer as many as we can. Otherwise, what we'll do is we will reach out separately and even put together a bit of an FAQ from the session as well, along with some other resources at the end. We're starting off with looking at lone workers at a glance. So when you mention the term lone worker, a lot of people sort of think about someone in the middle of nowhere, almost more a lone ranger than a lone worker. And that's absolutely correct. So many lone workers do operate in remote areas, often isolated from urban centres or typical workplaces. But along with that are a few other categories. So one we look at is what we call a transient lone worker. So that's someone who might move from place to place, whether that's traveling a long distance to get to work for a site or that sort of thing, or people who travel to multiple places, often for short periods of time. So people like salespeople, mobile finance lenders, community service providers, healthcare, a whole range of roles fall under that transient category. And the third subcategory we've got to look at is what we call a fixed site worker. So these are people who remain stationed at a specific location, but they are still partially or completely isolated from colleagues while they're at work. So things like warehouse workers, night shift workers, security personnel, anyone working in sort of a defined space, but still on their own. You could probably even classify working from home as fixed site lone workers as well. And what we're seeing with that sort of broad spectrum of roles there is that there is more common scenarios with lone workers. So it's estimated about 15 to 20% of people work alone as sort of the major part of their role. And as mentioned, with some certain changes, particularly post-COVID, there's a lot of focus on hybrid workforces as well. So you've got more people working from home, you've got more people in transit between locations, more isolated situations at site as well. So when you have that sort of split shift hybrid workforce operating, there's often more scenarios where people are finding themselves alone in the workplace. And of course, if you've got more people who are doing these lone worker activities, there are more people who are facing the risks associated. So in an EHS Today survey, there was around 45% of people surveyed who were lone workers that said they felt unsafe while doing so. So that's not great, and it's really not unfounded as well. When you look at 70% of organisations having reported a lone worker incident in the span of 3 years, and even worse, looking at the 20% of people who have struggled to get help after an incident, it's really sort of explains why there is that sort of unease and unsafe feeling about working alone without that support. And what that means, of course, is organisations are recognising that need for support and putting a bit of a focus on technology, because that's seen as a way to better enable communication and improve response times in the event of an incident. What it also does is fosters a little bit more of a proactive approach, having technology solutions with more sophisticated risk assessments, predictive data analysis, helps sort of identify some of those potential hazards ahead of time. And one thing that's quite prioritised when looking at safety technology solutions is that it's looking for systems that don't just apply to lone workers. So having features that map to other roles within the organisation to show that you're getting value out of that system, a return on investment in that system, but also most importantly, something that's engaging the entire workforce in the safety process. So what that also means is an opportunity for organisations to take a stock of who their lone workers are within the teams. So it's one thing if there's lone workers that you currently have processes in place for, and it's always a good idea to ensure that the information around those lone workers and what related risks and requirements are is up to date. But it's also probably worth taking a step back and looking at what other staff in the organisation might be undertaking parts of their job that identifies or classifies them as lone workers. So this could be through reviewing job descriptions, looking at the sort of work environments they're in, things like shift schedules, again, with split shifts, night shift, those sorts of things where they're encountering isolated situations. Travel's a big one, where you've got people traveling alone for work, whether that's long distances or it is in between different locations throughout the day, and any communication requirements that come along with that. But one of the best ways to do it is also engage in conversation with employees and getting their feedback about their roles and how they might be evolving. If they're seeing themselves facing more risks around isolated situations, it's good to know what support they feel that they need so that you can act on that. And of course, if this exercise uncovers additional lone workers in the organisation, it's probably also going to uncover some additional risks or challenges based on what they're doing in their day-to-day. So it's an opportunity to apply your existing lone worker processes for those users where they didn't have them before, but it's also potentially going to identify gaps in those processes based on the different scenarios and different situations those different employees are going to find themselves in. So looking at things through that lone worker lens for people who weren't necessarily classified as lone workers gives you that chance to highlight areas of improvement. And of course, when it comes to compliance, having that information handy is quite important too. So not only are you making sure everyone's covered by those internal lone worker policies, but also when you're looking at things like financial and legal obligations. So if you've got insurance policies that are dependent on having certain things in place or showing trends of risks being reduced, if you have workers' compensation claims that might have lone worker factors into that, making sure that you had the proper reporting and proper compliance processes in place for that is really going to help avoid any sort of nasty situations when those things do arise. But just with that in mind, I want to do a bit of an exercise and just have a look at 3 employees we would consider lone workers and see what their workday involves. So first up, we've got Ryan, who's a rural surveyor. He works with mining companies in the middle of nowhere. His typical day involves driving 2 hours from camp to site, spending the day working on site on his own, a few different locations within the area, and then at the end of the day, he drives back to camp. We've got Ian, our inventory controller. He works on site in a warehouse and he completes things like stock takes and audits of designated areas. And a lot of the time he splits between day shift and night shift, mainly so that those processes that he's doing don't impact other parts of the business. So often at times he's working alone in night shift. And lastly, we've got Sally, who's a social worker. Love the alliteration there. Sally is a social worker who does visits and appointments in her clinic, but she also does home visits as well. So there are days where Sally is out on the road visiting 3 to 4 clients in a day. And as part of Sally's role as a social worker, she deals with clients who are occasionally involved in domestic violence situations. So 3 different types of lone workers, all lone workers, different backgrounds, that sort of thing. But we want to take a bit of a closer look at where, when we're talking about supporting them, what sort of differences we see and what sort of flexibility needs to be implemented when we're looking at solutions. But taking a closer look at Ryan, he sees a lot of risk with what he's doing out in the middle of nowhere. He's got travel, he's driving 2 hours, he's out in the middle of nowhere on his own, he's isolated, far from not only people within his own organisation, but just community in general. And he also has a bit of a risk around fatigue. So if we look at Ryan's day, it's 2 hours of driving, 5-6 hours of work, 2 hours driving again. There is a fatigue impact that also affects him, which is exacerbated by him being out on his own. The environment he's working in, it's remote, it's outdoor, there's weather, there could be heat, wind, rain, that sort of thing. And he also has harsh terrain where that also increases things like risks of things like slip, trips and falls. In terms of communication, he's got a work phone, he's got a sat phone for areas where he might not have cell phone coverage. And he also has an in-vehicle monitoring system for when he's traveling to and from site. All well and good, but if we have a think about how we can better support Ryan in that particular remote type of lone work, there's plenty we can do. So if we start at the beginning of Ryan's day, something as simple as a risk assessment to go through and see what those risks are for the day, mapping them out, bit of self-reflection in terms of fatigue, potential hazards, those sorts of things, and mapping that out and sharing that information with his supervisors. That also plays into things like his travel plan. So if he's traveling 2 hours to site and doing different activities around the place, knowing where he is and when he should be there would be a good idea to have as part of that support. While he's on site, we want to have regular contact with Ryan. We don't want to have just a phone call at the end of the day to say, yeah, everything went okay, because if we don't get that call, we don't know what's happened. Some sort of regular check-in, some sort of location info, not just for the vehicle that he's got with the IVMS, but something for him himself while he's out of the vehicle and out and about. Again, things like fatigue assessments, just so he's cognitively aware of what's happening with himself while he's out doing that work, and making sure he's taking the right breaks, getting the right hydration, and just looking out for his own safety as part of that system as well. To compare that to Ian, so we see some similarities with the risks, isolation being the main one for lone workers. He's also got physical hazards as part of his risk, but they're different from Ryan in that they are not related necessarily to the physical environment. They are things like heavy machinery, large loads, hydraulic presses, those sorts of things. Ian also has fatigue, but probably a little bit different. It's not necessarily affected by the environment and the heat and the travel and that sort of thing. It's more affected by the time of the day and the way his circadian rhythms are affected. His environment is different in that it's a more familiar environment. It's contained. There's nothing really out of the ordinary. It's the same most days. There's nothing really changing there. Although there are some confined areas he might be working in that can increase some risk as well. In terms of communication, he's got a work tablet that enables him to do his job. He's got a personal phone, but oftentimes in warehouse situations, it's not really encouraged to use personal phones while on the floor. And again, ad hoc communication only when necessary is probably not the best situation for Ian to be in. So if we look at Ian's day from the beginning again, things like pre-shift checks for himself, a risk assessment, a fatigue assessment, making sure he's fit for work to undertake those duties, that he's aware that he's going to be alone and he might need support at a certain point in time throughout that shift. And that, of course, ties into getting that support through additional communications. So he needs to have some sort of check-in process to let someone know that he's going all right throughout the shift, and some way to let someone know that something's gone wrong, if he's fallen down, if he's had an injury, if something's happened catastrophically with the warehouse. Additional methods for him to get that communication out would be a great way to support Ian in that lone worker activity. One other benefit for Ian might be to have a lone worker solution that forms part of all the safety tools. So if he's doing pre-start checks and risk assessments and those sorts of things, having that all available in the same place would be one way to have Ian more engaged in the process and more familiar and comfortable with using the lone worker system that you've put in place. Now, Sally being a transient worker, she's got some crossover with the other two, but sort of the same but different approach. So if we're looking at the travel that Sally's doing, it's different from Ryan. She's not traveling long distances in rural areas on dirt roads. She's traveling within the city and suburbs. She's got regular idiots on the road to deal with and traffic and other sort of risks that are involved with her travel. She's isolated, but not in the same way that Ian or Ryan are, in that she's engaging with other people in the community, but she's alone in the scope of her work. So she's hasn't got that support network with her. She's reliant on communication to that support network externally. And one of the risks that Sally faces, particularly with dealing with other people, are unpredictable situations that could result in things like aggression and violence. So in her role working with domestic violence, then there are chances there may be some tense situations she might find herself in. And that plays into the environment as well. So being a mobile environment, it's very dynamic. She's going to different suburbs, different socioeconomic areas, different houses every day, different physical locations of things. There could be, again, slip, trips and falls within a house. There could be pets. And one of the big ones, of course, is the people side of things, the unpredictability of any aggression and violence that might escalate in those situations. What that means is the environment is very uncontrolled for Sally, that she is not on her home turf. She has to be very alert and aware to those sort of risks and how the situation might change quite quickly. That ties into the communication piece. So if she's got her personal phone and tablet that she's using for work, she might be able to text or call or check in as she needs to throughout the day, and she has the phone available and ready to call someone to help in an emergency. But where that can even be enhanced further is if we, again, starting at the start of the day, completing a risk assessment for every place that she's going to, knowing what risks are involved and sharing that with her supervisors mean that anyone who needs to respond to Sally has all the information at hand. They're not just relying on, oh, she's at this place at this time, what do we do? That does help though, mapping out the day with locations and planning check-ins throughout the day, whether it's start of the session, during the session, end of the session, to make sure it all went okay. And again, just that end of day communication is really helpful for Sally to feel like she has someone looking out for her. The other thing about communication with Sally is discretion. So we mentioned those sort of scenarios where things could escalate with aggression and violence and that sort of thing. Sally doesn't want to escalate that further by pulling out a phone and saying, I'm calling the cops. She wants to be able to see that something might be heading in that direction and notify someone that she might need help soon. And then when it does escalate, get that sort of, I need help now message out. So something that could sit on her phone or her tablet where she can discreetly send that message out would be really helpful for Sally. I'm moving on to a fourth person here. I want you to meet Christine. So this is a lone worker who might not be someone you would think about in your organization. She's a salesperson. She works for an international chemical company, and she's lucky enough to be heading to Europe for one of their workshops on Monday morning. She's taking a bit of time. She's heading out from Sydney on Thursday. She's going to stop over in Dubai, change planes. She's actually going to head to Prague and meet up with some friends and hang out for the weekend before driving to Vienna on Monday. So she's traveling alone for work, but she's not part of her company's lone worker policy, just because it's something she doesn't do all the time. However, if you think about it, if Christine has an incident or something goes wrong over that weekend, no one in her organization is going to know until she just doesn't turn up for work on Monday morning. So how can we help Christine? So we don't want to put anything in place that's going to affect her day to day as a salesperson. She's a bit resistant to sort of adding another admin piece to her day. We want a quick and easy solution that when these sort of situations do occur, she's got someone knowing where she is at certain times and can reach out and check in. If she's got a personal activities planned for the weekend, maybe some automatic prompts to say, hey, just checking in, is everything okay? Just something that's not so intrusive, but is available to her when she needs it. So while Christine and other types of transient workers don't have the same level of risk, or they might not need that regular or urgent communication, if you've got a solution in place for lone workers, there might be people like Christine in the organisation that can take advantage of that. And that's where the role of technology comes in. So there's a lot of crossover in terms of those risks and challenges and needs from those people, but it's also important to acknowledge those differences and identify the different types of scenarios where your lone workers operate and have a solution in place that meets those needs in a way that works within the way that those people operate. This is where an organisation might look to a software solution and have a look at some of the different tools available. Most common one these days is a mobile app. So something that's either standalone as a lone worker solution or a module as part of a different total software platform. So this is where we start looking at those features like things like check-in, panic buttons, SOS, tracking using the location of the phone, that sort of thing. But the real benefit of a mobile app is about having something sitting on a mobile device that means that nearly everyone has access to it. Nearly everyone has access to a phone, whether it's personal or work phone. Having that available while they're out and about is one way to have the features available on their primary method of communication. For situations where a mobile app might not tick all the boxes, just thinking about Ryan and his lone work activity out in the middle of nowhere, he's not going to have 4G, 5G reception, so he's going to need something that's going to have satellite coverage to provide that information that a mobile app can't in those scenarios. So a handheld or wearable GPS device that can track location to quickly identify where he is, but also open up additional lines of communication. So things like checking in or providing another option to get in contact with someone, and as well as things like SOS buttons, where you have some device providers that actually have linking to global emergency response centres, just adding that extra layer of support in the event of an incident. And talking about Ryan, we mentioned he had an in-vehicle monitoring system or an IVMS. One thing that's great about the IVMS is it does give that ability to track where the vehicle is and also provide information around incidents that might occur while in the vehicle. What it doesn't necessarily cover is the situation where someone is out of the vehicle. So you want to know whether the person who might be out of their vehicle is also safe. So having a lone worker solution that can provide similar sort of data and information linked in with the vehicle information can give you some comparative and complementary information about the lone worker while they're out doing their duties. So things like seeing a planned route in a journey management plan versus the actual route that a vehicle's taken, and then obviously having centralised notifications if any sort of incident arises. If the vehicle has a collision, everyone's notified that needs to be notified. If Ryan hits the SOS button on his GPS device, it goes through to the same people and he gets that response from everyone, no matter where he is in or out of the vehicle. One thing we mentioned was quite common across a lot of those examples users was the risk assessment piece. So having an automatic or digital risk assessment linked to a lone worker activity is a great way to have the information around what the individual is doing, one for themselves, so they can think about what they're doing throughout the day, what risks are in play, what they need to be prepared for, just anything that's going to help engage their situational awareness before they undertake the work. But the secondary part of that is that it also provides another level of visibility for supervisors. So you've got not just a paper-based form or an Excel sheet or a Word doc or whatever sitting separately from the actual tracking and activity. You've got all that linked together so you know that, okay, Sally's going to this place today. There is this risk. We need to make sure she has support and someone's looking out for her. And that also helps again with future planning. So they can see that if she's doing that activity again, they know that they need to provide that support again. Another feature that might be involved in some lone worker solutions is a dedicated 24/7 response team. So this is usually a trained and specialised response team that can work within the lone worker solution to provide that contact when there's a missed check-in. They can dispatch emergency services, find ways to communicate with that individual as needed. Whatever works within an organisation's process, these ERCs can usually adapt to. And where it sort of fits in is if you've got people who are working 24/7 or night shift like Ian, and you don't necessarily have the safety team or the support team who can look after him during those hours. It's just a way to have someone monitoring the solution to close some of those gaps where you don't have the resources. And one of the best benefits of having a technology solution as part of your safety systems is really the reporting and data. So having data means that you've got a full audit trail, so you can confidently, quickly, and easily respond to any compliance-related hurdles that might come up. That's a big one when we're looking at things like providing records after an incident to show reduction in incidents or trends for insurance purposes, and even providing your safety teams with confidence that they have the tools in place that sort of mitigate some of that personal responsibility and liability in the event of any sort of incident that does happen. A really good way to get quick insights as to what's happening within the whole safety solution, but even with the lone worker side of things. Having access to see who's engaging with the system and the application or the process and where some additional training and support might be needed to get them using it to the best of its ability. Having things like dashboards where you can quickly see where higher rates of incidents are or people who are having more cases of incidents and those sorts of things. One good way to also use it is to have regular automated management reports out. So if you've got information about your lone workers being shared within the organisation to say finance or management, they're going to know the trends, they're going to know the needs of the organisation and potentially provide that investment if any additional tools, resources, support is needed. Gets them on board a lot easier when they can see that data. And one of the other benefits is being able to use that data to pivot to a proactive and more predictive safety approach. So you can look at the data and say, okay, we've implemented a process based on the previous 12 months. The system's being used and constantly feeding data into that system to get you up-to-date information as that new system or new process or new support tool for the lone workers is being implemented. So you don't have to wait another 6 months or 12 months to look back. You can see how things are tracking with trends and make any adjustments that might need to be made. If things aren't going as planned, you might need to adjust that. If things are improving, you can continue and just sort of keep an eye on things. You've got good data to validate or expand on your findings. Another benefit of the data is being able to overlay different parts of safety information. So if you have a lone worker solution that has data reporting that says you've got 0 SOS or critical incidents in the last month, then you might think everything's going okay. Your lone workers are safe, everyone's okay. But if you have other parts of the business, like an incident reporting system that says you've had 3 incidents at those times of day in your system, only minor incidents, but you've also got a fatigue assessment process that says you've had 2 flags for fatigue levels during those times as well, while the SOS features, the lone worker feature is showing no problem, the fact you've had 3 incidents and 2 potentially related to fatigue might mean that there are some factors in play that could potentially be causing risks that you want to get ahead of and put some processes and controls in place before they do turn into serious incidents. And of course, safety teams know all these benefits of having a lone worker solutions. Sometimes the biggest hurdle is getting the lone workers themselves to buy in. There are concerns around a wide range of things, so it's really important to listen to that feedback and work with those lone workers to overcome those user concerns and make sure that they're engaged and have the same approach to the lone worker solution that you do. One big one is privacy. So we don't want to have that whole mentality of, oh, everyone's watching what I'm doing, you're invading my personal devices, that sort of thing. You need to overcome that hurdle. You need to minimize that intrusion on what they view as their privacy, minimizing the information and only using what's important, being transparent about how you're using that data, making sure that the information about what happens to that data after they leave the organization, whether it's all deleted, what's stored where and when, just giving that confidence that you are not taking advantage of that. Tech skills is another hurdle we see, and that's dependent on demographics, literacy skills, just technology skills, language skills. So you want to have a solution that's easy to use, but one of the key things we find is having a vendor part of the implementation process to be your partner. We want to utilize all the experience that's available to engage the users in sort of managed onboarding and training to help them understand why this process is in place and sort of overcome some of that technological resistance. Same goes for time. So getting sort of feedback from those employees as to how any solution is going to impact their day-to-day, making sure you can work with them to streamline any processes and get that investment and time from the vendor to help set up the solution that means that from the end user perspective, it's just plug and play. You start using it, there's no sort of ongoing change fatigue happening because everything's changing over time. We want to sort of get them on board as quickly as possible so that they're not impacted in their day-to-day. Another big one is workers' rights and unions. So privacy is a big part of that. A lot of concerns around privacy from the unions, again, addressing it in the same way we do with the end users. And it's really about framing that message to say that this tool is here for your benefit to make sure you're safe at work and you get home safe. We don't want to have you hurt or injured on the job. We don't pay you for that. And speaking of pay, one way is to also incentivize workers with safety metrics. So if they have productivity related bonuses or incentives as part of their contracts, having safety metrics built into that is a way to say, look, we need safety to be productive. That productivity is going to be beneficial to you. Let's see how we can get that and achieve that for you together. And just to sum up, really it is about that reassurance for the lone workers. So it's one thing to say that the solution is going to be there and they're going to have additional processes, but what it's doing is it's actually increasing autonomy. So it's showing that you trust them to do their job independently. You don't need to monitor them 24/7 and talk to them and call them every 5 minutes and say what's going on. You're automating those processes within the lone worker solution so that they can go about their job and you're only getting interaction with them when it's needed. It's about improving that response time when it is needed, knowing something's wrong sooner rather than later, someone reaching out when something doesn't seem right, and getting that fast response from multiple people as opposed to a quick phone call or whatever. You've got a system in place that means you're getting the best response possible. Using the system helps improve the system. So getting feedback from them means that they are contributing to finding better ways to do things and help you keep them safe. So it's really about having that journey together as opposed to an us versus them mentality to help make the solution better as time goes on. And lastly, we want to see it as the good kind of big brother. So again, talking about that privacy and that invasion of privacy and those sorts of concerns, this isn't the 1984 Big Brother that's tracking every keystroke and listening in to hear you badmouth the big evil organization that's watching over you. It's not the creepy reality show that's listening in when you're at home with your friends and family and that sort of stuff. This is a big brother that looks out for a loved one. It's the one that says, hey, I trust you know what you're doing, but just be careful. It's a bit sketchy in that area. It's the one who will answer on the first ring because he knows you normally text, or it's the one who's going to pick you up at 2 a.m. from a party or shoot you a message at the end of the day and say, hey, is everything okay? Hope all's well, just checking in. And again, it's just reassuring the employees that you're putting in this lone worker solution to benefit them at the end of the day. Now, just looking at time, I think we sort of cut it a bit fine for Q&A. If there are questions in the chat, what we'll do is we'll reach out separately to answer those. And also, we're going to put together a bit of an information pack for everyone who attended today's session. That'll include things like our lone worker guide, our journey management guide for your transient and remote lone workers, and also some risk assessment templates for those sort of different scenarios and types of lone workers that we went through. And what we'll also do is we'll include an FAQ in that as well from today's session. And with that, again, I hope you got some good information out of today's session, really just to take a step back and think about how your lone workers operate, who they are, who they might be if you haven't thought of those people before, and where those gaps in support you might need to look at improving them, and what sort of tools you might want to look at progressing with that for. And again, thank you for that, and I hope to talk to you soon.